part of the whole briefing. Yeah! Here we go. Yeah, huh? You're a good fan. Oh.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, Timothy, once again, and thank you for joining us from Osaka this time. Well, there are quite a few things again to talk about, and I believe that you brief us in or on them as well. But what's the point of you being in Osaka? Why are you there today?
So thank you, Maya. Good morning, everybody. So I'm in Osaka today because, as you know, I was hired by a member of parliament after I finished law school in Sendai about 35 years ago. And that member eventually became foreign minister, and he died recently. He died about 3 months ago. And today they're having a memorial for all of the secretaries that worked for him throughout his career. So there's a memorial for maybe about 65 people were invited. Not everybody is going to be able to make it, but that's why I'm in Osaka today, to pay tribute and to memorialize Dr. Taro Nakayama, who died at the age of 63 years old about 3 months ago. A great man.
Right. Well, thank you very much for letting us know. And without any further ado, let's dive into today's briefing, because I believe that you are also kind of time constrained, and we need to be brief. And of course,
Okay, that's fine. The the memorial service is a lunch and it starts at 2 o'clock, so I've got plenty of time. But let me get right to the news, and thank you very much for listening, everybody. Welcome to July. It is July 2nd. This is episode 125, and this is another achievement for Japan Expert Insights, and for me
you.
personally, yes, to be consistently delivering to you news of political importance, 125 weeks in a row. So I do this briefing wherever I go. Today I'm in Osaka. Last week I was at my home office, and probably the week before that I was on the deck of the good ship Santana, where I hope to be reporting from next weekend. Let's get right into it. Today, as you know, we always report on what's going on in Japanese politics. Some of it is political, some of it is economic, some of it is administrative, cultural, and it impacts on how Japanese politics moves and what happens with the prime minister. And as you know, the prime minister, there are three branches of the government. There's the legislative, there's the judicial, and there's the executive. The executive is the cabinet headed by the prime minister. So whenever there's a vote of no confidence, it's usually not against the prime minister, it's against the cabinet, the executive branch of government. And in Japan, the judicial branch does not play as much of a role as the Supreme Court does in the United States, or as it does in several other countries. But it's a parliamentary democracy. It's been in existence since the Meiji period. And as you know, we visited the Diet just this last 2 days ago on Friday. We had a tour of the inside of the Diet, what the architecture is like, how bills move, how policy is kind of chewed up and turns into to bills and into legislation. So for those of you who could join us, I think there were almost 50 people who joined us. Thank you very much. And if there's appetite for it and you want to do it again, we can arrange that at a later date. So what's going on in Japan now? The inflation rate has continued to soar. We talk about this increasingly over the last couple of months. The inflation rate has jumped. The consumer price index is now at around 3.2%. We reported a little bit on this last week because the rate was moving up when it was supposed to be flattening out. And so it caused a lot of consternation, and it has continued in this last week. The numbers for June have just come up, and the consumer price index has increased. And we talked last week about the number of items in the Japanese economy that are going through price increases. There are more than 7,000 of them that will have price increases in July. So that impacts the consumer price index, and also the fact that the Japanese government is subsidizing fuel costs as a consequence of COVID, and as a consequence of trying to get the economy going. That subsidy program is due to end in August. That's about a 20% subsidy that goes into the price that people pay for fuel, for heating, for electricity, for their cars. And I think the Bank of Japan, excuse me, is beginning to slightly reconsider that policy, maybe push that subsidy reduction back a couple of months, because the rate of inflation is really beginning to take hold, and it has really increased the pain throughout the entire country and throughout all of the people who vote, which is one of the reasons why the prime minister didn't decide to have this snap election 2 weeks ago. So, excuse me, as you might recall, the Diet ended 2 weeks ago. So this last week, the Diet has been out of session, which was good for us because we were able to walk through the Diet halls without too much enhanced security. But that means that all of the members of the Diet of the upper house and of the lower house, it's about 722 individuals, are now basically back in their home districts, talking to the constituents, kissing babies, going to weddings, that sort of things. But they're also hearing a lot of complaints about the price rises and what's going on with the economy. So factory output also took a dive over the last couple of months. The report came out this week, reported by the Internal Affairs Ministry, and the recovery is beginning to sputter. They're afraid of that. The price increases, or the wage increases of about 3.2% for Japanese workers was a historic increase to have that much, but it really didn't keep up with inflation. And so I think probably momentum and enthusiasm among the labor force is beginning to wane, although they have received maybe their summer bonuses or a little bit of a kick in their monthly salaries. The increases in cost of living is just beginning to be debilitating. The jobless rate is at 2.6%. So anybody who really wants a job in this economy can have a job. In fact, for every person who's looking for a job, there's 1.3 jobs available. And it is putting a crunch on how you get things done. I'm in Osaka for the last 2 days, and boy, it is. You can notice the booming part of Osaka. There are a lot of people. There are a lot of people on the streets. The percentage of foreigners is really noticeable, and it looks like the market here is really churning. But I've got to imagine that having the labor force, the people to do the service industries, it's hard to find those people, and so you have to pay them above market to get them to work for you. And there are a lot of foreigners who are coming in and sucking up those jobs because, they're dirty, they're difficult, they're sometimes dangerous, and so the foreigners coming in to supply that need is becoming a little bit more noticeable. The Bank of Japan is going to meet at the end of this month, and so with the price index going up and the yield of bonds, the government owns 53% of all bonds that are issued. That's a huge percentage of the bonds, and yet they still need to have more money pumped into the economy. And without the enthusiasm of Japanese investors, the foreign investors are coming in. The yen was at 145 yen to the dollar on Friday, so that means that it is depreciating precipitously. But that invites foreign investors like Bain Company and Warren Buffett to be coming in and purchasing Japanese companies and Japanese stocks, which appear in relation to other currencies to be a good market buy. And so there's a lot going on in the stock market. The unfortunate thing with that is whenever there's a bust in any economy, there's usually a kind of a bubble that increases just before that, and we're seeing a little bit of that. I hope it's not an indicator of what is to come. But with the Japanese yen at 145 to the dollar, you might remember about 8 months ago, the same thing happened. Japan's yen was increasing to about 150 yen to the dollar, and the Japanese government, the Bank of Japan, jumped in and invested $63 billion to shore up the yen. That was a huge thing to happen. It's the first time that it happened since 1999. And so we're reaching that point now with 145 to the dollar. There is speculation that the Bank of Japan will once again jump in to shore up the markets. There are a couple of things going on that indicate that might be the case. The Vice Minister for Finance, who was in charge of this huge investment 8 months ago, he was supposed to be rotated. He's in his second term, and they just extended his term. This is the first time in 3 decades that a vice minister has stayed in position for yet a third term. So this is not elected official. This is a technocrat, a bureaucrat within the Ministry of Finance. To extend that kind of indicates that he's had experience doing this sort of thing. It is a big market mover, and it could happen. So please keep your eye on what's going on with the yen and the yen dollar fluctuation. My number was the prime minister. I'm going to talk about his approval rating after I talk about the general scene of Japanese economy and finance. But the my number issue continues to weigh down his popularity. So as he is the head of the executive branch of the government, anything that's wrong with the economy, with whatever's going on with business, with the yen, it is blamed on him. And with my number, this is a kind of social security card for all Japanese. 73% of Japanese have signed up for it. It is supposed to be voluntary, although everybody is signing up for it because of the benefits, the ease of use it's supposed to have. But a couple of problems have surfaced there. It is a system, a technical system that is supported by Fujitsu. So Fujitsu is producing the software and all of the hardware for the card readers, for the card issuing machines, for the security and that sort of thing. So Fujitsu is really under the gun because even if there are a couple of problems, the reaction with the public is really huge. They don't tolerate much of a variance in providing this service to the Japanese seamlessly. And with so many Japanese having the same last name, there's a large percentage of them that have the first and same last name. There is a little bit of seepage, a little bit of slippage that's occurred there. And in this last week, there were 2 instances that were reported. So now the sky is falling. We have to change the system. And so the prime minister is really catching flack for that, as is the Minister of Health, the Minister of Internal Affairs, the Minister of the Digital Agency. Everybody's being blamed for that. And so it looks like maybe something has to happen there. One of the issues that plagues the system is that although the My Number system, My Number card is voluntary, they've decided under legislative act to incorporate the health insurance system to the My Number system. So if they do that, then that means that my card or my number is basically going to be mandatory. It's a kind of a trick that was inserted, and that also makes the Japanese population very suspicious of what the Japanese government is doing. So the numbers don't look very good for the prime minister or for fixing this. The Fujitsu has actually shut down its system, and so from I think for the next month or so, you're not going to be able to pick up your identification, your registrations, your Hanko, that sort of thing that you could produce with your My Card, going to a convenience store or some other place to get these documents. Now the system has been shut down in several prefectures, and that's going to be a heavy hit. And just for context, for the year in starting in October 2021, for the year after that to November 2022, there were 7,300 cases where there was a mistake or misidentification, or maybe documents were sent to the wrong person. So that sort of thing is really hammering the prime minister. So keep your eye on what's going on with My Number and also with the health insurance, which is available to everybody that lives in Japan, even the foreigners who have a residency here. But it does look like the prime minister is suffering from that. The Diet is out of session, so the administration still goes on. There might be some moves later this month or next month to fix that in a very public way. The idea of closing down the Diet and having a snap election is still looming, but I think with the prime minister, he needs to shore up his presence before he even considers that. Moving on to South Korea and Japan, it looks like they're really making tremendous progress there, supported by the United States, obviously. There is going to be a summit held in August, probably towards the end of August, as it was reported just this last week. So Japan and South Korea are continuing to build this relationship. The shuttle diplomacy has once again restarted with President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida, exchanging schedules and sharing more and more time together. President Yoon was in Japan during the G7. They met privately. The three with President Biden as well. And at that meeting, it was decided that we should have a summit, not something on the sidelines of some of these conventions that we usually join, the G7, those kinds of international meetings where the countries get together and then the president meets or the prime minister meets on the sidelines. This is going to be a real live summit, probably over 2 days, maybe 3, in Washington, D.C. So it's something to look forward to. But there are a lot of things that are going on there. Japan and Korea just this last week agreed on currency swaps. This has been revived since 2015 when it just went into the toilet. So the finance minister from South Korea visited the finance minister from Japan this week. They signed a couple of deals. And the idea here on the currency swaps, since the yen is now 145, there's a little bit of movement there. It does impact what's going on with the South Korean currency and other currencies here in the region. So they've decided to commit $10 billion to preserve the currency so there's not that much fluctuation. This is following what they initially started in 2001 to prevent the after effects of the earlier financial crisis. And at that time, they committed 13 billion yen, which at that time was a little bit more expensive than what 13 billion is right now. So they devoted that for currency swaps. They increased it 10 years later to 70 billion in 2011. But during that time under the Park administration, as you'll recall, the disputes between Japan and South Korea over the comfort women issue, the statues that they were putting in several cities throughout the United States and Europe, keeping this issue alive and in the public eye, it really damaged the relationships. And so this died in 2015, this currency swamp collaboration. So that it's getting back on track, it's getting new life into it is a pretty big deal. It's something to watch. It is a indicator of other things that are going on. So Yoon's visit to Japan was the first time that a president of South Korea visited Japan in 15 years. So that's also big. Japan also relaxed export controls in March for trade and products coming in from South Korea. This was kind of reciprocal to what the Koreans did a couple of months earlier. I don't know why there was a lag there, but maybe just in terms of, confidence building, you do it first and then we will follow up. And as a consequence of that, Seoul withdrew its trade complaint in the World Trade Organization against Japan's kind of discriminatory practices with regard to products and services. On Tuesday, Korea also went on the preferred trade partners list, the white list for Japan. So now products are dealt with an arm's length transaction without any discrimination, without any onerous subsidies or regulations to be with that. And the Washington Declaration, which was signed in April when Biden and Yoon and Kishida got together, deals with sharing information, nuclear proliferation, and that sort of thing. So these are pretty big deals that are starting to really take hold. The South Korean-Japan relationship, I think, not just for the United States, but for the stability of the Asia-Pacific region, is really a critical bilateral relationship that needs to actually get even better. And I think it's moving in that direction. You'll notice now that we are in July, more scooters will be on the roads of Tokyo. They just relinquished the requirement that you have to have a driver's license to ride a scooter. So previously you had to have a driver's license to ride the scooters because there's several classifications. Some of them are electric. They can't go beyond a certain speed limit. Others are a little bit more robust. But for both of them now, you can ride them without a license, which means there's going to be a lot more noticeable congestion. It's a boon to foreigners who come to Japan, who want to experience, who are tourists that want to experience, winding through Japanese streets and neighborhoods. I mean, you've got to imagine how much of an attraction that is. And now that is going to be available starting this month. So you're going to start noticing that. You're also going to start noticing a little bit more of the consumer and the public perceptions against the scooters, because definitely there will be more infractions, more people will be hit, people will be bumped off their bicycles by people who are riding their scooters. And also, since many people coming to Japan drive on the wrong side of the street, when you're on a scooter, probably you make these mistakes on a regular basis. So it's something to look out for, but it's a good thing to happen, I believe. It just needs to be monitored and adjusted, but let's see how that thing goes. Moving on, I want to talk a little bit about, the fact that we had a visit to the Diet, and just give you a little bit of a historical snapshot of where Japan is and how we got where we are. So forgive me for kind of backtracking. I'm going to hit on what's going on with the Prime Minister, but historically, what is Japan and how Japan got to be where it is something of real importance when you're starting to look at parliamentary democracy here. So let me just give you a couple of facts here. In 1519, Cortez went to Mexico. This was with Montezuma and the great massacres there, and the fact that Spain finally went to Mexico, captured Mexico, took the gold, but they didn't just take the gold. And it took another 2 years before Magellan came by and discovered the Philippines. Many people don't understand that in his around the world trip, he discovered the Philippines. The Philippines was always there. But it also tells you why the Philippines is kind of like it is and why it's such a strongly Catholic nation. But the trade route was going from east to west at that point. Magellan went through the Cape of Good Hope, came up, and then crossed over. And it took another 60 or 70 years before they could figure out how to come back the other way. And when they came back the other way, it meant that they discovered the trade waters, the current that goes north hits Japan, and then towards Chiba, it turns to the east, and they could ride that current. The only thing was that the Japanese typically at that point in time killed people who were washed up on the shore. So in 1543, there was a boat crash. Portuguese, for the first time, landed in Japan. They knew what Japan was from the Chinese, and the Portuguese were coming from the west to the east. So they were trying to sail towards Okinawa and got caught and landed in Japan. They were returned. Not all of them were killed. In 5 years later, Francis Xavier came to Japan and started a missionary operation here for the Catholic Church. And maybe 5 or 6 years later, Spain finally colonized the Philippines. And then in 1596, there was a San Felipe incident where a Spanish galleon crashed in Japan, and they killed all of the people there, and it created this incident in Nagasaki where all of these Christians were killed. You're probably familiar with that story. But that was in 1596, a long, long time ago. And then 4 years later, William Adams washed up on the shore. William Adams is the fellow who was made famous by the movie Shogun. What was his name? Blackthorne. Anjin. And so he washed up and helped Tokugawa incorporate Japan into a samurai nation with its capital in Tokyo. Just 9 years later, the San Francisco crashed on Chiba Coast, and one of the survivors was the governor of the Philippines. He was accepted by the shogunate as a visitor, and then trade between Spain and Japan began to flourish. But that is the closing of that period until Meiji began in 1868. And with Meiji began the concept of democracy and this rush to mobilize and to modernize and to develop the technologies to catch up with the West. And it was just a couple of years later that they formed their first diet in 1887. So if you're watching any of the Japanese television programs during the Meiji period, the dress has changed completely. The more Western dress, the way of thinking, the technology, medical, legal, and also the incorporation of democracy into Japanese system. So they built their first diet over in Hibiya Park. It burned down the next year. Unfortunately, it was made of lumber, as most buildings were. Using Hibiya Park again, they built a second structure. Once again, the architects were German architects. They built another wooden structure that lasted quite a bit longer. And then in the early 20s, after Japan had defeated Russia in a remarkable sea battle in 1809, they decided to have the empire and a building in the Diet, which was made of stone and ferroconcrete, and that's the building that we have today. So the Diet building and the way politics is determined wasn't created as a consequence of the Meiji era, although the building was created at that point in time. So the Constitution after the end of World War II was recreated with the help of the United States, and I'm saying with the help of in quotation marks, and that's the Constitution that we have right now. There are many efforts for a long period of time to revise the Constitution, and in fact, when the political parties, the Liberal Party and the Democratic Party, were first melded together, one of the concepts that held them together was to change the Constitution. And that is why there's this constant push for the Prime Minister, whenever the Prime Minister is from the LDP, to revise the Constitution. It hasn't happened in 70 years. And that driving force within the LDP to change the Constitution, it's kind of one of the things you sign off on when you become a member of the LDP. So the snap election that the Prime Minister was considering just 2 weeks ago is complicated for a couple of reasons, but the driving reason why the Prime Minister needs to have consider that is because he does not have 2/3 of a majority in the lower house. And until the LDP or an LDP in coalition has 2/3, it can't even consider revising the Constitution. So in the upper house, the numbers are a little bit better. I think they have 2/3 in the upper house, but they need 2/3 in the lower house. And it's probably much more difficult to achieve that in the lower house than it is in the upper house. So that's why this coalition, even though in the coalition there are 296 members of the LDP, the 261 members of the LDP in the lower house, the Komeito coalition only provides 32 more members. So it's not a whole lot, but it is enough for them to have a majority in both houses and a supermajority in one of the houses. But that is kind of the background. I hope I'm not getting too much in the weeds of why the Prime Minister needs to always consider this, and it's why we always talk about it. We always talk about that. And we always talk about the coalition relationship between the LDP and Komeito, and also within the LDP, what's going on with the factions? What's going on with the Abe faction? Do they have a leader? Who's on first? Who's on second? Why is Mr. Kishida the Prime Minister when his faction is the fourth largest? There are 3 other factions that are far more powerful than he is. So it also tells you that since he's in that kind of diminished position, any form of criticism that his son is taking pictures in France when he should be at the summit, or when he's having a Christmas party and they get drunk and they take pictures of themselves on on the podium that's used by the prime minister. Any of these things just generate a huge backlash because he's in a very tenuous position. And there are some people that want him to be gone so that their guy can come up. So these things are really critical in Japanese politics, and the reason why we spend so much time talking about them. So currently, the prime minister's popularity has taken another hit. He was on a high at the end of the G7. He was shaking hands and slapping people on the back, and Zelensky visited. There was all the news was on Mr. Kishida internationally and globally, and here in Japan too. The economy actually did have an uptick as a consequence of that, and he was on a roll for about a week. And then the news about his family having a Christmas party, 7 months ago, having a Christmas party and taking pictures of themselves with their friends in the prime minister's residence really created a big brouhaha, more out of proportion than what it really should mean. But like I said, the prime minister is somewhat exposed in this area. So his popularity actually in this last week took a hit, depending on who the poll is from. Nikkei Daily and TV Tokyo put it at 39%. And this is the first time that his approval rating and his disapproval rating are flipped. So there are more people that disapprove of him and his cabinet than approve of him. So there are 44% of the Japanese who are polled. So, take your guess how much this is representative of people as a whole, but it is pretty instructive that 44% of the people polled said they are disapproving what the cabinet is doing, and 39% are actually opposed to him in the cabinet. So it's not a very good mix for him. It was probably a good call for him not to call for that snap election. Analysts had actually said that if he did that, he would have lost, the LDP would have lost about 60 seats. The reason for this precipitous fall in his popularity is the My Number opposition, the confidence in the child care spending, which he has talked a lot about, but he hasn't really talked about where he's going to generate the money to pay for that. And the money that he has said, physically, verbally, about what he's going to devote to that is on par with the amount of defense spending over the next 4 years. So the child care, he's earmarked 3.5 trillion yen for the next 3 years. That's pretty aggressive, and people are saying that's great. Maybe people will have more children, but how is that going to be paid? Is that going to have another consumption tax increase? Which, if it is, indicators are that the prime minister would suffer poorly as a consequence of that. And finally, there's just a lack of confidence in the government carrying out the broad scope of many of the other issues that are related, defense spending and that sort of thing, that the prime minister talks expansively about, but really is a little bit skinny on details. So he is now suffering the worst negative rating since he started as prime minister. And of those polled who are negative, 67% said they are against the government's response to My Number. So My Number is hitting hard there. And only 24% said that the government's response to the My Number system is okay, it is tolerable. The Nikkei poll put it a little bit higher at 76% of those who are against the prime minister are against him because of My Number. And there's another 55% who joined there because this melding of the My Number system with the healthcare system is a bit of a, I think probably they interpret it as a shift, a trick of the hand to do that. So they're watching very, very carefully. The other thing that happened this last week while the Diet was out of session is that we've talked about the LDP and Komeito and the rift that they've had as a consequence of the potential election. So there was going to be possibly a snap election. People started to line their forces up. If there was an election, the gerrymandering system called 1010 would go into effect, and the Komeito wanted a couple of seats deemed as theirs. So give us these seats, don't run a candidate in these seats, and we'll give you the other seats, and we'll tell our party members who where we don't have a candidate to vote for the LDP, not to vote for Ishin, or don't vote for your heart, but stick with the party line. And that helps the LDP win, because in exchange, the LDP is going to help us win. And there was a couple of seats in Tokyo, because Tokyo is receiving 5 of these new seats under 1010. Tokyo receives 5 of them. And Komeito said, we want one of those. We want it in District 28. And that is a seat that I think we can win in. Unfortunately, there was an LDP candidate who is influential in distributing who gets to run in what electoral districts. He had his eye on seat 28 too, District 28 in Tokyo. And he kind of thumbed his nose at Komeito because he wanted his guy to run, not the Komeito guy. So this created a huge rift. And Komeito said, look, screw you. We're not going to support you in Tokyo. We're not going to support you anywhere throughout Japan. If you're not going to support us in the 28, then all deals are off. They fought about this for about 3 weeks. And just this last week, the party leader of Komeito and the party leader of the LDP, Prime Minister Fukuda, met and kind of kissed and made up. I don't know how strong it is or how long it will last. But what they've decided is that Komeito will support LDP in elections. If there is another election for the lower house, or when there is an election for the lower house, Komeito will support them, hold their nose, and support them in those districts where Komeito, since it's not a large party, doesn't have a candidate to run in there. But in those election districts where we do have a candidate, bug off, support us, don't put a candidate in so that it splits the vote, or actually you steal more votes from the Komeito. There was an agreement there, but they decided that in Tokyo, the 28 seats in Tokyo, 29 seats in Tokyo, that it would be kind of a free-for-all. So you run your campaign, we run our campaign. Tokyo is kind of off limits. So I think they've bought a little bit of time. It is also telling us that a snap election is not in the cards for the next couple of months. I think the next thing that's going to happen is a new cabinet is going to be installed. That's another can of worms. We can get into that perhaps next week. It's a little bit more complicated. I've spent too much time talking about these weeds in the grass too much already. But let's go on with what else I've got for you. And I think that's actually it in terms of Japanese politics that's going on that's important. Maya, have I gone overboard? Is anybody still awake? So she's off. So where is Maya? She's answering emails, I guess, or lining up questions. So anyway, if you have questions or issues, if we're talking about something that we shouldn't be talking about, that you want us to spend more time with, there you go. Write Maya a note. She will line it up and she'll tell me what I'm supposed to do when I have these briefings. Maya?
Yes, thank you, Timothy. Now we're open to questions and answers in, let's say Clubhouse, also LinkedIn, and even YouTube, if I can get there. I'm on 3 devices at the moment, different devices, so please forgive me if I'm slow. Okay, here we go again. Okay, now, Timothy, can you hear me? Maybe
Yes.
not. Timothy,
I
can
can
you hear me?
You. Sure.
Oh, that's good. Okay, thank you. All right, going there. Yes. Okay, we have a lot of good mornings there on LinkedIn. Looks like people didn't post many questions today. Okay, so Timothy, you were talking about the rift between Komeito and the LDP, and
Right.
I remember that I read an article about actually them deciding to cooperate in Osaka, Kansai, because it looks like Ishin Nukai is really going strong there, and there is that fear that either Komeito or the LDP will lose their, let's say, their grip on power in those districts. So, what is your comment on this?
So Maya, is this question from you or is it from one of our audience?
Oh, it is from me.
Okay, because it's a great question. There has been some movement there. I didn't want to get into it because it's a little bit contentious and a little bit of description is required. But let me just tell you that yes. So there was a deal between Komeito and Ishin that they would help Ishin establish themselves in Osaka and in the neighboring prefecture in exchange for Komeito shoring up their issues during the election that we just finished, the general election for municipal offices. There was 4 by-elections for members of the parliament. There was 1 upper house and then 3 lower houses. And Komeito had a deal with Ishin that will help you in Osaka, and they did. And Osaka kicked out a lot of LDP members in Osaka. They got the mayor's position, they got the governor's position, they won the entire house within Osaka prefecture, or the majority of the seats there. And the agreement between Ishin and Komeito was that, and in the future we'll continue this collaboration. But now that Ishin has got what it wanted, it has kind of decided, we're okay now. This support that you thought you might be getting with us is, that was a yesterday deal. So Ishin is trying to shore up its relationship with the LDP. So this agreement that they had with Ishin really angered the LDP, because there were a couple of prominent LDP members in Osaka who lost their seats, and Ishin took it over. So Ishin is now as an established stronghold in Osaka and Hyogo. They've got 2 governors now, and they've got several seats. They're making more progress here in Tokyo as well. And their plan is to establish themselves, first of all, as the #1 opposition party, so to beat out the Constitutional Democratic Party, which they think that they will be able to do in the next election. And then from there, to kick out the LDP within the next 10 years. The leader of the Ishin party is a fellow who used to work with Dr. Nakayama when I was there, Mr. Baba, and I expect he will be at the memorial that we're having today in Osaka. So yeah, there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of bad blood. There's good blood. There's a lot of trading horses. So politics, like they say in Washington, D.C., if you want a friend, get a dog. And I think that's somewhat apt here as well.
Well, I have a question to you about that, specifically the districts in Osaka and Kansai, after hearing what you just told us. So do you expect any, let's say, transition of members of the LDP to Ishin Nukai in that area as we go on? Because as you said, so Ishin Nukai has a goal to actually dethrone the LDP there. So can you see, or can you, I don't know, maybe predict anything like that happening there?
So one of the fears of the LDP is that if they don't have a snap election, it gives Ishin more time to develop candidates. So with regard to your question, it's unlikely that at the national level, LDP members will switch to Ishin. There might be a couple, but people are going to lose their reputation if they do that. On the other hand, at the local level, so you might be a governor, or you might be a city mayor, or you might be really popular in a certain district, and the LDP has helped you win elections, or maybe you are registered as an LDP member. Those people are open for being wooed by Ishin, and Ishin is on the prowl now for these kinds of candidates who are a little bit dissatisfied with what the LDP has done for them, that maybe during the last local elections they didn't get enough support, or they just won by the skin of their teeth, and they're kind of angry with the LDP, or maybe certain roads and bridges haven't been built which were promised to them. Yeah, if Ishin provides them a platform to go from local to national, that's a real attractive option. If I'm going to be supported at the national level by Ishin, the LDP is not going to. The LDP they've already got their pecking order. Right. I'm set where I am, so they're going to tell me to shut up and continue doing what I'm doing, and we'll repay you, in due course. Having the opportunity to run for a national election is a pretty attractive deal.
Yeah, I think that it will be fascinating to watch the dynamics and how they change there. Indeed.
That's why this Komeito rift that was sealed this last week, I think it's only a Band-Aid. I think the prime minister has not been that successful. The Abe administration and the Suga administration were far closer with Komeito and Nikai as Secretary General before Mr. Motegi. He had a really long-standing relationship with Komeito, which helped support this coalition that's been going on for 20 years. So I think that there's room for a change there, and it could be that, convincing Ishin rather than to become a competitor and the number one opposition party, they're going to have more than 31 members. And the other interesting thing is, although Komeito provides 32 members to the coalition, it's strange because most of them are representatives from the district list, not from being voted on because of their own personality. So there is a pecking order here. If you run for an election and it's because of your name and your reputation and you win those votes, inside the Diet, you have a higher reputation value. You have a higher priority than those people whose name is on a list. And instead of voting for an individual, when you vote in Japan, you vote for an individual, and then you vote for a party. And when you vote for the party that has the most votes, the larger number of people that are listed on their tablet become members of the parliament. But they've only become members of parliament because they're high on the list and the number of votes that they received as a party from the people is higher than somebody else's. So what Komeito is hoping is that the larger number of people who are voted on because they stand for themselves. So of the 32 in the lower house, only 9 are directly elected. That qualitatively tells you that there's a little bit of something going on there. In the LDP, on the other hand, they have 261 members of the lower house, and 189 of those are represented from their own position, their own personalities, their own drive because of their history and that sort of thing. So I think if the LDP had an opportunity to switch that and have more than 32 members, they would probably do it in a heartbeat. So they would have to convince Ishin, we're going to give you 2 cabinet portfolios or maybe 3. We're going to be in a coalition party. And with you, we now have 2/3 in the upper house. We have 2/3 in the lower house. Plus, Ishin is also in favor of constitutional revision where Komeito is not. So the LDP might feel a little bit more released in being more expansive on their policies. And like I said earlier, one of the reasons why the prime minister is suffering so poorly in the opinion polls is because he's weak on policy. That's where most people are criticizing him. Part of it is personality driven and some of the scandals that have come up, but everybody understands those aren't huge character diminishing scandals. But on policy and how he implements policy in those areas he's decided to spend his political capital, people are criticizing that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. And we have a question from Hiroko. So her question is, former PM Suga played golf with Mr. Aso and Mr. Motegi. Is it something to do with reconciliation with Komeito, as Mr. Suga has a good connection with the party?
No, I think there's far more going on there. If you remember from last week, we talked a little bit about Mr. Suga's role as potentially a deal breaker for the Abe faction. So the Abe faction, it is such an electric issue. For those of you who joined us on the Diet tour, a member of the lower house, Odawara Kiyoshi, joined us and gave us a bit of a briefing as we were standing in the rain. It was really great for him to come up, but he did give us some insight. One of the questions from the audience who went through the Diet tour, there were about almost 50 of us, by the way. He said, when in response to a question, what's going on with the Abe faction? What can we anticipate there? Odawara Sensei, who is a member of the Abe faction, said it's too delicate, it's too electric. I really can't comment. I can't really say that much about it. The idea here is with Mr. Suga, they can't figure out who's going to be the leader of the Abe faction. The idea is maybe Mr. Suga would come in and be the leader of the Abe faction. They need to have that cohesion that a leader gives them. So having, playing golf with Mr. Motegi and whoever else he played golf with, I mean, this happens, on a weekly basis. They are out of the diet session, so there's a lot of that going on right now. I wouldn't read too much into it, but yeah, there's definitely there's some problems in Japanese politics, and if there is an election, who knows what happens with the LDP, and if it's not particularly good, or if it's interpreted as not particularly good, the prime minister is going to suffer as a result of that. So of course everybody's talking about who's going to be prime minister. I want to be prime minister. How about you? You already were prime minister. It's my turn. No, you were prime minister too. And what are we going to do with Mr. Motegi? Typically, the Secretary General, who is Mr. Motegi now, is kind of the lined up candidate to become prime minister. He's already been Minister of METI. He's been Foreign Minister. He helped with TPP. He helped with launching the My Number system. So he is very prominent and very powerful. He's got the third largest faction. So, he's somebody that is angling for that. And there has been discussions, we talked about it this last week, that the next Secretary General, when there's a cabinet shift, that Motegi needs to go out because his relationship with the Prime Minister is not very good. And who is going to be the next Secretary General? There were two people that we talked about last week, and both of them would be really debilitating for Mr. Motegi. And once there's a cabinet reshuffle, what do you do with Mr. Motegi? You can't ignore him. You can't not give him a portfolio or a cabinet seat. What is that going to be? He's already been everything that's really good and cool except foreign minister, and foreign minister is really the ownership of Mr. Aso. He was foreign minister. He was finance minister. Excuse me. He was finance minister throughout the entire period of the Abe administration. He was deputy prime minister, and now that he is resigned from that, he is just the leader of the Aso faction. He is the vice president of the LDP, but his second or third in command within his faction is now the finance minister. So it's kind of like, his faction owns the finance ministry. So if Motegi's going to be there, how do you treat Mr. Aso, who has the number 2 largest faction? So yeah, it takes a lot of playing golf, a lot of drinking, a lot of cigarette smoking to kind of figure that one out. And I think that's part of the background for playing golf. But yes, it's distinctly something to keep in mind and to watch. Great question.
Yeah, thank you, Hiroko-san. What are the odds of Mr. Suga becoming the leader of the Abe faction? Because we know that he has been, I don't know, biding his time, or because everybody expected him to form a faction. He didn't. He hasn't yet. And he has that group of what? It is growing. In the beginning, it was 7 or 9 people. Now he has more than 20. And no faction yet there. So what are maybe there are some trade-offs there for him as well, of being, an independent group leader, not a faction leader. And, what are the benefits? What are the,
Well, he is, admittedly, he's a very unique individual in Japanese politics. He's the only person to become prime minister without a political faction.
Right.
He was handpicked by Mr. Abe. He is the one that when Mr. Abe resigned because he was ill, stuck with him, went to his bedside, while he was in the hospital and said, we can get you back. Let's rebuild, what the Abe legacy is. Your father didn't become prime minister, but you should become prime minister again. And, you owe it to the people in the faction. And they built it together. So when Mr. Abe resigned as prime minister, he passed it over to Mr. Suga, even in light of the fact that he's not a member of the Abe faction. So who knows how that's going to play out? It's too early to predict that. They need to figure something out. And if it's going to be one of the 3 or 4 leaders, as time goes by, there used to be 5. One dropped off, and then another one dropped off because of this fight with Tokyo 28, the 28th district, that created this rift between Komeito and the LDP. So I think as a consequence of that, the individual who was in the Abe faction responsible for that decision, his position has probably fallen. He's no longer a contender for leading the Abe faction. So yeah, it's a war of attrition, and the longer they wait, the more these guys fall out. The other idea is that Mr. Seko, who is in the Abe faction, he is the leader of the upper house members of the Abe faction. He might break off if they don't get their act together, if they don't finally elect somebody to be the leader. He's sick and tired of it. He's kind of ineligible to become the leader, and of course that makes him angry. He's in the upper house. The prime minister has never come from the upper house. So he was hoping that there would be a snap election because he would resign from the upper house and run in the lower house, and therefore qualified to become at some point in time prime minister. But also he's a great politician. He has all the attributes to become a leader of the Abe faction. So if we're not going to have the snap election, he's changed his mind, his strategy, potentially to take the upper house members of the Abe faction, split that, and start a new faction, which would be it would be the maybe the third biggest faction if that was to happen. That would give him immediately great credibility and a couple of cabinet positions as well to distribute to people who decided to vote with him, leave the Abe faction, and join him in creating a new faction. So there's a lot going on there. And I think while people are away, they're going to be talking about this. I don't think we're going to hear much. The next big news we'll hear is probably a change of the cabinet, and then probably a supplementary diet. Not in August, in September. So that's my prognosis right now.
Thank you for that. Okay, let's see how things play out. Well, Timothy, it looks like we don't have other questions at the moment, and you can go. I know that you're not on the good ship Santana now, but Osaka is waiting for you. So you can enjoy the day there, and of course the memorial gathering for Nakayama Sensei. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Maya.
And to everybody. Oh, we have, okay, just a moment. I hope that I can get David. David, can you join us?
Somebody slipped in.
Yeah, okay. Or maybe, okay, we have, once again, I cannot get David on stage, but maybe Yuka. Yuka, good morning.
Good morning. I'm sorry for the last minute question.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. And then, while I'm asking Maya, maybe you can invite David back up here. Anyway, so thank you again for the great, session again, Timothy.
Thank you.
So you talked about, so the one of the reasons or major reasons seems like Mr. Kishida's low approval rating is because of this my number card fiasco, right? So
right.
I want to sort of like question is why? I mean, so to me, and I've heard some people are so against the concept of my number.
Right.
People are sort of returning their my number card, and which is creating some sort of, like a paperwork nightmare for the government officials. And to me, what is the major reason for this my number card system to begin with? What they are trying to accomplish? Are they trying to match up the number with the person and the person's information and their asset mainly? Then why do people so against this concept?
So I think it's several-fold, but I think it's this process of digitization of Japanese society. So there's a huge push going on there, and it started
right.
before we created, or before the LDP created, the digital ministry that was created by Mr. Suga, as you'll recall. So it's only been in existence for less than 3 years, but it is the idea that they digitize all of the government, they digitize and interconnect the administration of the country and also the assets of the country, which are its people. So they do want to quantify, what people are doing, how they spend their money, moving forward towards a digital currency. There's been movement, really quick movement there. I think it is inevitable that that will happen. And once that happens, then the government will be able to see how people spend money, how much money they have. And one of the driving forces of the Kishida administration is to somehow force these people who grew up in the bubble economy, the people who are now retired, they hold the vast majority of wealth in Japan that is just sitting there. It's sitting under beds and in pillows and in safes and in stocks and bonds that they're not pushing and flushing out into the economy. They're not investing it. They're hoarding it. And with Mr. Kishida, what his idea of this new capitalism, this virtuous cycle where people spend money and then they earn a return and then they pump it back into the economy, it's not starting because the older people who have worked all their lives and saved their money and been very frugal, they're still being frugal, and he's trying to create some sort of environment where they want to invest, that the amount of risk that they are capable of assuming has increased. They're willing to take that because the returns are better. So there's a couple of things moving there that he doesn't have full control over. So the best idea is at least let's figure out how much money people have and then either reward or penalize them for how much they're contributing to the economy. I think that's the drive that he's, and it's not just him, it's probably the LDP as a policy.
How can you do that? I mean, they're going to tax people for their asset, the true asset size, not income. Is that the whole idea?
No, I think first of all, we just quantify what's there. That's the first issue. So once we can quantify it, then we can calculate and we can reward people and we can tax people. And I think the reason people are so opposed to it is they don't want the government in their lives. It's like in most places, I'm here from the government. I'm here to help you, close the door and lock it quickly. Because whenever the government gets involved, things cost more, the services, the quality of the services diminishes. And in particular for the my number system, it is to help people, Japan is so analog. So when you need to go get an identification system or registration, or you need to purchase something, you have to go to the city ward office and get the document that certifies you as who you are. Your signature or your hanko is representing you, and you need that certification. And if you can go to the convenience store and get the same document without making a trip to Kuyakusho or Shiakusho, that is the convenience that is offered for that. But it's just the beginning of this entire system. I don't think the My Number system will die. I think it's too big. I think they just need to bolster it with more supercomputers, and Fujitsu needs to be better at, the hardware and the software components. And then the Japanese government in charge of that needs to have better people who are entering the data people are registering by hand and putting that into the computer by keystrokes. So there's a slippage there too, that they make mistakes on the data entry. And then just the issue of so many people share the same first name and last name. So these kinds of things will happen. So to have a fail-safe method of doing it is that's the goal. And I think, as we all know, the Japanese just have a very low tolerance for sloppiness, for mistakes, and that sort of thing. So I think it is somewhat out of proportion. They're blaming the prime minister for this sort of thing. But, they were criticizing him because his son, took an embassy car to buy souvenirs for the people at home when he was on his European tour, or having a family dinner party in the residence where the prime minister actually lives. Go figure.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, actually you got me some idea. I'm gonna, search, because the US have Social Security, then I'm sure there are millions of like Michael Smith. I wonder how do they differentiate those folks in US? I'm gonna do some search. I'm gonna just ask ChatGPT. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Yuka. Yes, just to add, Mario, he commented that he thinks that in a final stage, your financial information will be collected with My Number. So because they already collect bank information through it, or probably that's where we are headed for. We don't know, but yeah.
They're trying to centralize it. I mean, the whole idea of the digital agency is to centralize all of the ministries. All of the ministries have their own server, their own email system, their own way of doing things, and they're trying to incorporate this so that at least the prime minister knows what's going on. He doesn't have to have a meeting with people. He can have a couple of keystrokes, or he can have somebody in the massive prime minister's office just report to him, this is what's going on, this is what's going on in the background, these are the email communications that support that, and we think this is what's happening, so that you can catch something beforehand. But the whole idea here is to make the prime minister's office the preeminent manager of what's happening in Japan. And so it's just a long, slow march. And I think, being that it's Japan, they will ultimately be successful at it. It's just we're going through the initial pains of initiating something like that.
Indeed, yes. Okay, and we have two Davids at the moment on stage. David Sharp, thank you very much for helping David Malitz come up on stage, because for some reason I couldn't do that. So who of you would like to speak up first?
Morning, David.
Good morning, everybody. This is David Sharp here. I don't have much to add. I was just helping get Mr. David Malitz back on the stage because we had some technical issues there. Just if I would add one small question, Timothy. The centralization of all this data, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a very safe move going forward, given the track record of cybersecurity in the Japanese government over the last couple of decades.
Yeah.
So any special funding or any special legal structures in place to ensure that as things are centralized for efficiency purposes, that security is also being suitably looked after?
Oh, sure. So they just passed the economic security legislation just this last year. It's one of the feathers in the cap of the prime minister. So part of that is, determining a couple of key industries where they get special treatment, they get special security, they get special money, and also how they treat, foreigners who are living close by or purchasing land, and also the structure of how they protect digital information. So that's really going on afterburners now. Japan has long tried to consider developing something on its own that would be kind of a Google search engine, or maybe the Microsoft world of, data input, or, and the American companies, Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, they just have such a lead. They've got a several decade lead on the Japanese. So the Japanese are saying, well, then why don't we buy something off the shelf? But then that means that some of the data that is ours, and how big data really can give you lots of information on how people actually act and what they're going to do, and it's very predictive. Having that information in the hands of a foreigner who might or might not be adversarial to some of your interests, that is unacceptable to the Japanese. So they've got some firewalls that are being considered there, but there are some products that are being produced now. So as technology moves forward, there are some products that actually overcome some of these hurdles. And as technology, as time goes on, technology increases, geometrically. So I think they're going to be pursuing that, and they've devoted a lot of money to creating that, because Japan used to be, the economic superpower. It used to be the technological leader with producing, high-tech products throughout the whole world. They've fallen in that regard, and they want to get back up to it. And part of that is, yes, keeping a grasp on technical data, the sharing of data, the securing and the storage, and also just the security of it. So there's a lot going on in that area.
Yeah, I've been looking at this AI field recently, as you know, and the thing that kind of strikes me as being out of step with all the policies that you just mentioned is the recent announcement by one of the politicians. I can't remember his name at the moment. He announced that AI in Japan was going to be allowed to have access for training purposes of the machine learning software to illegal information, secret information, foreign government. There was going to be no legal structures in place to prevent or stop AI from being trained on data from any source. And that doesn't seem to square with good security, doesn't seem to square with the kind of the Western rule following world order in terms of property rights, ownership of information, that sort of thing. So I just wanted to mention this AI field seems to have thrown a lot of policymakers for a loop, and it doesn't seem to fit in step with the rest of the cybersecurity policies.
Yeah, but that's what always happens. Technology always moves faster than policy and legislation. So legislators are always scrambling to address technical issues or new things that are hitting the market, because they come on faster than the laws can. For example, the scooters, we're talking about the scooters and how they'll be legitimized for anybody that's older than 16 years old to drive those. So the technology of having scooters and having them on a shared basis throughout the city, you just use your card, that was unavailable 5 years ago. And now that it's beginning to be implemented, there are going to be issues that are going to come up, novel issues that the law hasn't really created a solution for. So there'll be victims, and they don't have a way to kind of get security or get justification for injuries that are suffered. And that's just the mix of policy and commerce and lobbyists and trying to get the policymakers to acknowledge and to prepare for these new technologies that are coming up. And we're in a growth phase now. We talked earlier about the Spanish with the Cortez and visiting Mexico. That was at the same time that Magellan was circling the world. That boom of discovery happened within a very short period of time, maybe 30 years. And all of a sudden they're sending, Spanish galleons that are built in Mexico on the Pacific side back towards the Philippines and further into the Spice Islands and that sort of thing. We're going through the same sort of a technological revolution here too. And so there will be some mistakes made. There will be some disasters that are created, and at some point in time, law and policy will catch up to that. But it's just, because it's technology, it's just growing so fast. And I know, and I appreciate the fact that policymakers are struggling with that. And I think the politician you were talking about was Kono Taro, who is the minister for the digital agency currently.
Yes.
Thanks for the answer, Timothy. I'll maybe hand over to the other David.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. Just one comment from Janusz. We have that Fujitsu notified the government that a considerable number of data was hacked even 7 months ago. So obviously it happens, and they still need to catch up with that.
Yeah.
Okay. And Dr. Malitz, thank you for coming up on stage. Thank you for your patience. So please.
Oh, thank you. It's just David, and thank you, David, for letting me in. I have a quick question regarding the constitutional amendments that Timothy mentioned earlier, right? So this has been this long-running quest of the Conservatives to amend the Constitution. And since last February, I think there has been an uptick of popular support for it. So since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So if the Constitution should actually get amended, what would actually keep the LDP together? Would they then maybe splinter into their factions? Maybe some going to Ishin, others more towards Komeito? Thanks.
Oh, thanks, David. And no, the LDP would feel their oats, and they would move aggressively. We've done it once. We were able to revise the Constitution. There are other things we need to revise too. And by the way, it was those damn Yankees that made our Constitution. So let's change it whole hog so that it is a Japanese Constitution. So I think probably it's just never ending. The problem is that it's never been amended, and that's the real hurdle. So the first amendment I think that goes through that will be voted on will probably not touch on Article 9, because that is the most difficult. There'll be other articles that are really ripe for revision. And once they do that, once they break the mold, then Article 9 will come up very quickly. And it could be a phase, maybe every year, every diet session that starts in January for 150 days, as dictated by the Constitution. In every Diet session, they revise a certain article of the Constitution. That's very very likely to be a scenario that comes up, and the LDP is only going to get stronger and more adamant once they have 2/3, or in a coalition with somebody, they have 2/3 in the lower house and the upper house. You will see vast changes going on, and it will never stop.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
The strong get stronger, the weak get weaker.
Indeed. So what you're saying is that they just need a precedent, and they need to create that precedent with something that is not so controversial,
Right.
when it comes to the public opinion, right?
Right. And the reason, David, that we saw so much of an uptick in February was not just because of the Russian invasion, but also the missiles coming from North Korea. And my prediction is that there will be some incident that triggers the entire Japanese population to wake up and say, we can't tolerate the situation that we have right now. We need to change it. And we need Article 9 to have offensive capabilities and first strike capabilities. And we need to have a military industrial complex like many other countries have. Like, look what's happened with Israel. Look what's happened in the United States. All of the technology, all of the work that is going and all the revenue that's generated as a consequence of that, it helps bring us out. And we've been in the doldrums since the crash of the bubble economy. So let's get back on track. And I think that's a very convincing argument in my view.
Yes, it is indeed. But at the same time, it doesn't sound like we're headed for peace in this region, because when you think about the countries with the strongest industrial military complexes, it's all of them are in. They have been constantly at war. Oh,
Well,
okay. Anyway,
it's discussed quite a bit right now that the United States needs to come to terms with the fact that it's not a unipolar world anymore. The United States is not the world's policeman. They don't dictate, they don't dominate, they don't project that kind of strength and that kind of unity of forces. They're struggling hard to kind of keep it together. The fact that the US currency is the world currency. So they're losing in a lot of different quarters, or maybe they're shaking a lot of different quarters. But I think in a multipolar world, Japan probably needs to step up their game and not rely so much on the United States or on anybody else. They need to stand on their own. And the fact that they haven't done that as a consequence of the Constitution, as a consequence of the ending of the Pacific War, and all of the animosities that are still existent throughout Southeast Asia, as we kind of deal with these and quell these, the emperor and the empress were just in Indonesia for a whole week 2 weeks ago. And one of the, it's the most populated Muslim nation in the world. It is the most populated nation in Asia. To be able to, go there and to have that. I mean, it's the first time for the emperor and the empress to travel outside of Japan since he's been emperor. And his first visit was to Indonesia. So it's telling, they're trying to address those issues. And everybody understands what is involved there. The Japanese Navy flying the flag of the rising sun. It was opposed throughout all of South Korea, and they've dealt with that issue. The Japanese Navy will fly under that flag, not under the national flag of Japan, but the flag that actually the Navy used during the wartime period, has been accepted as a fait accompli. So there is progress that's being made. There are issues that are still lingering, but I think in the near term, Japan is going to come up and fix Article 9 of the Constitution and develop a more robust military industrial complex. I think that's in the cards.
Timothy, I keep losing you, and sometimes I don't know whether this is the connection on my side or this is the connection on your side. So to everybody in Clubhouse, thank you very much for your patience. Just
sorry about that. Oops, I lost you now, Maya. Sorry, Maya. It looks like we're still live, but you're frozen. And
Can you hear me
here you
now?
come. Here you come. Yes.
I think that we're suffering from unstable connections today, but yeah, Yuka, thank you very much. And yes, Hiroko-san, can you hear me too?
Yes, I can hear you now loud and clear. Thank you so much for having me on the stage. David Sharpson invited me, so why not join? I just want to say something about my number.
Yes, please.
Okay.
It's just that I'm not going to apply or for my number card or
Maya, I'm not catching that.
Yes.
It sounds like you're gargling.
Hiroko-san, I am sorry. Could you please give me a second?
Can you hear me?
Now, yes. Okay. I'm sorry. We lost you maybe about 30 seconds ago.
Oh, okay. So what I'm saying is that my number and the government is trying to combine or integrate my number and the health insurance.
Yes.
Right.
So that's the exact reason I don't want to, get my number card, because the health insurance that contains my ultimate health private information, and I don't want that. And having it.
I'm not catching that, Maya.
Right.
Maya, you seem to be frozen too.
Okay. Timothy, did you hear
No.
Hiroko-san's?
Was there a question there? Oops. Now I'm losing Maya. We have to fix these technical issues.
Can you hear me? It seems that there are two of me at the moment. I'm sorry. I think that we're experiencing some connection issues today, and I have no idea why it is happening on certain days.
Sunspots.
Maybe, yes. But yes, I can see. Hiroko-san, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you both
Okay,
loud
thank
and
you.
clear.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for sharing your opinion about that. And yes, personal or private health information is really something that we should be very careful with whom we share it and who can see it and so on. It looks like, as you say, we cannot really trust the government to handle that information very well at the moment. Who knows what happens in the future, though? Yeah, hopefully things will get better. But definitely, cybersecurity issues are still very serious and they're still present. So there isn't much we can say or we can add to that at the moment. Timothy, before we
I'm
lose,
still here.
you're still there, yes. Good to see you. Okay, well, it looks like, yeah, we have also from Tim in Atami. Tim shared Eisenhower's famous farewell speech on the topic of the military-industrial complex. I think that it's a great speech, and it was very prophetic, if I can use this word. We are seeing that some countries are indeed, they have actually fulfilled that prophecy. Not only the United States, but hopefully Japan will not be there. And yes, David, you're saying that Japan, also Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, The company produces tanks and also submarines and so on, and it is already a precursor. We can talk about the military-industrial complex in Japan, but we also I think that well, that is true. So Japan, the Constitution of Japan does not actually allow the country to use these, what's the submarines and so on for anything but, let's say,
Defensive.
self-defense, defensive,
Right.
yes, defensive purposes. So it makes it really a different case. Japan is a different case from the other countries that Timothy mentioned earlier, the United States and Israel. So I think that we can discuss this. This is a good point for debate, but well, also probably on a different day, because I keep losing Timothy. And yeah, I'm sorry. Well, I hope that you don't mind us actually next week when, yes, oh, we have one comment from Janusz. Just for information, the last November at the US, Korean, and Japanese Navy exercises, the Japanese Rising Sun flag was minimized to A4 size, so the Korean media could not depict, and the Japanese requirement that the ship must be flagged on display was satisfied. So that was a kind of, Timothy, you couldn't hear me. Shall I read this out to you again? Oh, I cannot hear you now. I lost you totally. No? Okay. I'm sorry then. Why is that? Can you check your microphone? No, Timothy cannot read it there because he is not in Clubhouse. All right. So I really apologize for this bad connection at the moment. Yes, and well, let's continue this discussion next week. Once again at 8:20. Yes, Sunday we will be here once again. At that point, probably Timothy will be reporting from the good ship Santana. In the meantime, I wish you a great Sunday and also good week ahead. That's all for today. And well, thank you very much for sticking with us. Yes. See you next week then.
Thank you, Maya-san.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.